You're listening to the Qur'an Tafsir, Understanding the Word of Allah, a podcast dedicated to explaining the Qur'an, presented by various reliable scholars. This podcast is powered by Seekers Hub Global. Visit seekershub.org for online courses, our Q&A service with reliable scholars, and engaging media.
الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا محمد ذي القدر العظيم وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. Alhamdulillah, tonight we'll be reciting the 19th juz of the Qur'an, beginning at Surah Al-Furqan, verse 21. And Surah Al-Furqan is the 25th surah of the Qur'an, and reciting all of Surah Al-Shu'ara and completing with verse 59 of Surah An-Naml, the 27th surah of the Qur'an. And four central themes that we'll be touching upon in these verses. One is another description of the true believers. And this is a very memorable description from Surah Al-Furqan that starts in verse 63 and goes on for a number of verses. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes وَعِبَادُ الرَّحْمَنِ, and the servants of the All-Merciful. What is the characteristic of the servants of the All-Merciful? And a number of qualities are mentioned. The servants of the All-Merciful are those who walk humbly on earth. الَّذِينَ يَمْشُونَ عَلَى الْأَرْضِ هَوْنًا. What is their basic quality? It's humility. They have humility with their Lord, and they have humility in their dealing with others. They don't have pride and arrogance and haughtiness, and that is their distinguishing trait. So that when the foolish address them, they say peace. When the foolish address them, they say peace. Which doesn't mean literally only that you say peace. Means that قالوا سلاما, assalamu alaikum, means that you avoid argument. You avoid getting into useless discussions and debates. So someone's arguing to you about what's going on in Egypt. You're Guyanese. Just say, I'm Guyanese, I don't know what's going on in Egypt. Right? But to get into a fight and stop talking to your uncle about what's going on in Egypt, your discussion sitting in Brampton or sitting in Etobicoke or wherever you may live is not going to change the situation in Egypt. Okay? So when some discussion, some argument will not be of benefit, just end it in a dignified manner. But this humility is manifest spiritually. Those who spend the night bowed and prostrating. And other qualities are mentioned of the righteous servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so in Surah Al-Furqan, if you go home and want to reflect on these verses, they're amongst the most eloquent verses in the Qur'an. Right? From beginning in the 25th surah, verse 63 onwards. At least 14 different qualities are mentioned of the righteous. But it's also something to keep in mind. Whenever you recite the Qur'an, keep in mind the virtues that Allah mentions. How should you be as a believer? And you should always ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Prophet ﷺ, when he used to recite the Qur'an, if there's anything of the good, the Prophet ﷺ would pause and make dua that, oh Allah, grant me that virtue. And then the second key theme that we're going to look at is how much of the good do you seek as a believer? And this is from the same set of verses from Surah Al-Furqan, now in verse 74. That from the qualities of the servants of the Most-Merciful is that they ask Allah for the greatest possible good. And this verse 74, if you have children, if you have a family, or are hoping to have a family, this is a dua that the righteous say for themselves, their spouses, and their offspring. And it's a very powerful dua. But what do you seek for yourself, your family, and children? Okay. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, وَالَّذِينَ يَقُولُونَ رَبَّنَا هَبْ لَنَا مِنْ أَزْوَاجِنَا وَذُرِّيَّاتِنَا قُرَّةَ أَعْيُنٍ وَاجْعَلْنَا لِلْمُتَّقِينَ إِمَامًا. And those who say, O Lord, grant us in our spouses and in our offspring a joy for our eyes. وَاجْعَلْنَا لِلْمُتَّقِينَ إِمَامًا. And make us imams of the people of taqwa. Make us the foremost of the people of taqwa. There's a number of lessons here. One is, if you're seeking the good for yourself, for your own family, your children. One way of attaining it is you make dua for everyone. O Lord, grant us, in the plural. Right? Because if you wish good for others, the angels say, may you have the like of what you asked for. That's one. Secondly, you cannot uphold the good on your own. You need support. You need family. You need friends. You need community. You need society around you. So when you ask for the good for others, you're taking the means of facilitating it for yourself as well. And it's an expression of sincere concern for others. O Lord, grant us in our spouses and in our offspring. And offspring, the word used for offspring here, dhurriya, is not simply awlad, not simply children. Your dhurriya are all those who will come forth from you until the last day. Because you want the good for yourself and your children, not just your own children, but till the last day. Because the believer thinks not just according to the immediate, but they look into the horizons of eternity. I want to preserve the good for myself, my family, my community, my society for as long as possible, till the last day. وَجَعَلْنَا لِلْمُتَّقِينَ إِمَامًا, and make us imams of the people of taqwa. Who is an imam? An imam is someone who is worthy of emulating, of copying, of following, because of what they gather in them of virtue and good qualities. This is not a call for leadership, okay? But make us the foremost of the people of taqwa. Make us exemplars worthy of following from the people of taqwa. So saying that, oh Allah, make me a good Muslim, make my children good Muslims, by the standards of the Sunnah of the Prophet _, by the standards of the Qur'an, this is a bid'ah. Why? Because the Quranic call is وَجَعَلْنَا لِلْمُتَّقِينَ إِمَامًا. Make us the best of the best of your creation. Who's the best of your creation? The people of taqwa. So don't just make us of the people of taqwa. Make us the foremost of your servants, who are the people of taqwa. And this is how you make dua. You ask Allah for the highest of matters, the best of matters, and then you take the means of attaining it. So this itself is a very powerful dua to recite. If you want to learn a dua for yourself and your family and your community, this is a very powerful dua. Surah Al-Furqan, 25th surah, verse 74. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in Surah Al-Shu'ara, and there's a third point that we wanted to touch upon. Surah Al-Shu'ara, Surah 26, verse 88 and 89. About returning to Allah with a heart that is pure. That the Prophet ﷺ told us that Allah does not look at your bodies or your forms, what you amass and accumulate. Rather, He looks at your hearts. Rather, He looks at your hearts. And this is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in Surah Al-Shu'ara, verse 88 and 89, يَوْمَ لَا يَنْفَعُ مَالٌ وَلَا بَنُونَ. That day, the day of resurrection, is the day when neither wealth nor offspring will avail one. إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ, except one who comes to Allah with a heart that is sound. Which either means that the only thing that will benefit you that day is a heart that is sound. But the other means of benefit, they will only benefit you if you approach them with a heart that is sound. Your wealth will only benefit you if you sought it with a heart that is sound, meaning in a manner that was pleasing to Allah. You spent it in a good way with a good intention. Your children and all that you did for them won't benefit you unless you approach it with a sound heart. What is a sound heart? A sound heart is a heart that is seeking the pleasure of Allah and whose state is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's free of malice and envy and rancor and jealousy and greed and those qualities that are hated by Allah, and is characterized by those characteristics beloved to Allah. And finally, so this is something Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala repeatedly reminds us of the need to have a pure heart. And finally, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us, and this is a repeated theme in Surah Al-Shu'ara, which is the 26th surah of the Qur'an, that the prophets throughout remind of certain key lessons. If you listen, all the prophets in the Qur'an, their call is common. Believe in Allah and then be careful of how you live. That caution in how you live, that's taqwa. Right? That's taqwa. Here, the prophets say, I am a faithful messenger to you, so be mindful of Allah and obey Him. I ask no reward from you, for my reward is only with the Lord of the worlds. The prophets were exemplars of sincerity. They sought Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They have come with truth, and they called to embrace that truth. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us of those who recognize the beauty that the prophets have come with. They came with light that gives contentment to hearts, that revives souls, and that brings true meaning to life. So we should ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He make us of those who embrace that prophetic call, who take the opportunities that this noble month facilitates for us to rectify our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that we enter into that state of ala bi dhikrillahi tatma'innul qulub, that truly it is by the remembering of Allah that hearts find rest. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bring into our hearts and lives that beautiful light of the beloved Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, through which everything is made beautiful. Through which everything is made beautiful. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina wa nabina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallama tasliman kathira. These are just some of the reflections from the 19th juz of the Qur'an. Much more could be said about these verses, but these are a few central points. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.
Thank you for listening to the Qur'an Tafsir, Understanding the Word of Allah. Help Seekers Hub give light to millions around the world by becoming a monthly donor at seekershub.org/donate. Your donations are tax deductible in the US and Canada.